What if I told you two strangers backed by a millionaire built one of the biggest bands in the world, only for it to collapse into lawsuits, betrayal, and a handshake that would haunt them for decades? It all started with failure. Not fame, not hits, failure. In 1969, Rick Davies was stuck in Munich. His band had just fallen apart. No money, no plan, no way forward. He was a working-class keyboard player who had already taken one shot at success and missed. Then something strange happened. A Dutch millionaire named Stanley August Miesegaze saw him perform, and for reasons no one fully understands, he made a decision that would change everything. He offered to fund an entire band from scratch. Not a loan, not a contract filled with traps, just belief. But it gets crazier. Miesegaze didn't want control. He didn't want creative input. He simply told Davies to go find the right people and build something great. That was it. So Davies did what any desperate musician would do. He placed an ad in Melody Maker in August 1969. It was simple, a real opportunity for serious musicians. One of the people who answered was a teenager named Roger Hodgson. And right away, you can feel the contrast. Davies came from a tough, working-class background. His style was bluesy, grounded, real. Hodgson was the opposite. Private school, highly musical, a natural with multiple instruments, and a voice that could stretch across 4 octaves. When they first met, Hodgson sang Dear Mr. Fantasy, and that was enough. Davies knew he had found something different. 2 completely different personalities, 2 completely different worldviews, forced into the same band by chance, and a millionaire's money. They started under the name Daddy, not exactly legendary, but eventually they changed it to Supertramp, inspired by a book title. It sounded unusual, but it stuck. Now here's where most stories would start to take off. This one didn't. Their first album in 1970 went nowhere. No buzz, no sales, nothing. Their second album, in 1971, did even worse. Long songs, extended solos, music that didn't connect with anyone outside the room. Davies would later admit it himself. It was unfocused, self-indulgent, easy to ignore. By 1972, the dream was already dying. And remember, all of this was being funded. For 3 years, Miesegaze kept paying. Studio time, equipment, living costs, all of it. Adjusted to today's money, it was well over £150,000. And he got nothing back. No hits, no momentum, no proof that this band would ever work. So eventually, he made a decision. But wait, this next part changes everything. Instead of demanding his money back, he walked away. No lawsuit, no pressure, no repayment plan. He forgave the entire debt, just like that. Think about that for a second. 2 struggling musicians, no success, no safety net, and the one person funding their dream simply lets them go, with a clean slate. Most bands would collapse right there. This one didn't, because now, for the first time, there was no backup plan. No investor, no cushion, no excuse. It either worked or it ended. And that pressure changed everything. Because from that moment on, Supertramp stopped experimenting and started becoming a real band. They rebuilt everything from the ground up. Davies and Hodgson knew the music had to change. It had to be tighter, more focused, less wandering, more purpose. So they brought in the lineup that would finally make it work. Dougie Thompson on bass, Bob Siebenberg on drums, John Helliwell on saxophone and woodwinds. This was the version of the band that mattered, and then came the isolation. A&M Records saw potential, but they also saw a mess. So they pulled the band out of the chaos and locked them away in a farmhouse in Somerset, England. No distractions, no city noise, just 5 musicians and the pressure to figure it out. It sounds peaceful. It wasn't. Because now every flaw was exposed, every weak idea, every argument, every difference between Davies and Hodgson started to surface. One leaned into structure and groove, the other chased melody and emotion. But what if I told you that tension was exactly what they needed? Enter producer Ken Scott. This wasn't just any producer. He had worked with the Beatles. He had just come off David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust. He knew how to turn chaos into something people would actually listen to. At first, he wasn't impressed. When Scott heard the early demos, he thought they were terrible, disconnected, random, going nowhere. But then he saw them play live, and that changed everything. He realized the problem wasn't talent, it was direction. So he pushed them, hard. And the process became brutal. They spent over a day just trying to get a single drum sound right. Not the whole song, just the snare. They experimented with everything. Techniques that sounded ridiculous on paper. Shaking drum brushes in front of microphones to create wind effects. Recording a musical saw just to get an eerie tone on one track. Even going to a real train station to capture the sound of an actual train for authenticity. This wasn't normal recording anymore. This was obsession. And slowly, something started to come together. The album they were building wasn't just a collection of songs. It had a theme, a message. It talked about school, pressure, feeling trapped by society, losing yourself while trying to fit in. Simple ideas, but deeply relatable. The opening track hit like a shock, a child's scream cutting through the silence. Not for effect, but to represent the pressure of growing up inside a system that doesn't care who you are. And just like that, they had something real. In 1974, they released Crime of the Century. And finally, people noticed. The album climbed to number 4 in the UK. It broke into the American charts. For the first time, Supertramp wasn't invisible anymore. But here's where it gets interesting. The success didn't come from one voice. It came from the balance. Davies brought weight, grit, structure. Hodgson brought melody, clarity, emotion. Alone, neither had worked. Together, they created something that connected. The single, Dreamer, became their breakthrough. The hit they had been chasing for 5 years. And just like that, everything changed. They weren't struggling anymore. They weren't unknown. They had proven they could do it. But success has a way of hiding problems. Because while the world was finally hearing Supertramp, inside the band, something else was starting to grow. Something quieter, something dangerous, a divide. By the late 1970s, that divide wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was starting to shape everything. The band made a move that seemed smart. They relocated to the United States, setting up in Los Angeles. The goal was simple. Get closer to the audience that was finally paying attention. Bigger market, bigger success. And for a moment, it worked perfectly. But underneath that move, something else was happening. Davies and Hodgson were drifting apart. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. Different lifestyles, different priorities, different ideas about what the band should become. So when they began working on their next album, the tension followed them into the studio. The sessions dragged on longer than usual. Small issues turned into patterns. One moment says it all. Hodgson brought in an air ionizer for the studio. Helliwell said it gave him headaches, so it kept getting turned off, then back on again, over and over. It sounds small, but it wasn't. It showed how little things were starting to wear people down. Because the real issue wasn't the air, it was control. Who decides the sound? Who leads the direction? What is Supertramp supposed to be now? And here's where it gets wild. Despite all that tension, what came out of those sessions changed everything. In March 1979, they released Breakfast in America. And it didn't just succeed, it exploded. Over 15 million copies sold worldwide. Number 1 on the Billboard 200. 6 weeks at the top. Supertramp went from respected to everywhere. And the songs drove it. The logical song hit like a question everyone already had, but couldn't explain. Growing up, losing identity, trying to make sense of it. Goodbye Stranger brought confidence, a sharper edge. Take the Long Way Home felt reflective, like looking back while still moving forward. And Breakfast in America turned a simple idea into something unforgettable. You heard these songs everywhere, on the radio, in cars, at school dances, on summer nights with the windows down. This was the peak, the moment every band hopes for. But what if I told you, this success was quietly breaking them apart? Because most of those hits came from Hodgson, his writing, his voice, his style, and that shifted the balance. Davies' blues-influenced sound started fading into the background, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't driving the success. And that changes everything, because now it's not just about music, it's about identity. Hodgson later admitted he never fully felt like he was in a band. He felt like a solo artist inside one. At the very moment the band became global, he felt separate from it. And Davies? He didn't even think the album would reach the top 5. He bet $100 on it. He lost. But that says something deeper. While the world saw a band at its peak, inside, the foundation was already shifting. They just hadn't faced it yet. By the early 1980s, the distance between them wasn't just creative anymore, it was physical. Hodgson moved to Northern California, a quieter life, more space, more focus on family and spirituality. The rest of the band stayed in Los Angeles. 2 worlds, 2 directions, and now 2 separate ways of thinking about the future. So when they came together to record their next album, it wasn't the same band anymore. It felt divided. The album was called Famous Last Words, and looking back, the title feels almost too perfect, because this was where everything started to fall apart. The sessions were tense, not explosive, but constant. Davies wanted to return to longer, more progressive tracks, the kind of music they built their reputation on with Crime of the Century. Hodgson wanted to continue the momentum of Breakfast in America, shorter songs, cleaner melodies, music that connected instantly. Neither side was wrong, but they couldn't agree, and that stalemate drained the process. Hodgson later described the entire experience as a nightmare, not because of the music itself, but because of what it felt like to create it. 2 people pulling in opposite directions, trying to finish the same album. But wait, this next part changes everything. When Famous Last Words was released in October 1982, it still succeeded. It reached number 5 in the United States. It went gold. By most standards, that's a win. But compared to what came before, it felt like a drop. And inside the band, it felt like the end. Because after the tour in 1983, Hodgson made a decision. Not in a meeting, not in a press release, on stage. During a concert in Munich, between songs, he told the audience he was leaving, just like that. No dramatic speech, no long explanation, just the truth. The partnership that built Supertramp was over. But here's where it gets complicated. They didn't end it with contracts or lawyers. They ended it with a handshake, a verbal agreement, simple, clean, trust-based. Davies would keep the name Supertramp and continue with the band. Hodgson would keep ownership of his songs and perform them as a solo artist. It sounded fair. It sounded respectful. It sounded like the kind of ending that doesn't turn ugly later. But what if I told you that handshake would become the biggest mistake of all? Because verbal agreements only work when both sides follow them. And over time, that started to break down. At first, both went their separate ways. Hodgson released a solo album in 1984 that sold around 2 million copies. Fans saw it as a continuation of the sound they loved. Davies kept Supertramp going, pushing into more progressive territory. 2 paths, 2 versions of what the band used to be. But the truth was obvious. The songs people remembered most were tied to Hodgson. And that imbalance didn't go away. It just waited. And years later, it came back louder than ever. At first, the split looked clean. Hodgson stepped into his solo career with momentum. In 1984, he released his first album, and it sold around 2 million copies. For many fans, it felt like a direct continuation of the sound that made Breakfast in America so big. The melodies were still there, the voice was still there, and the connection with the audience didn't disappear. He toured, he built his own path, and for a while, it worked. But then, everything stopped. In 1987, Hodgson was involved in an accident that left him with both wrists broken. Not one, both. And just like that, his momentum vanished. He couldn't play guitar. He couldn't perform the way he used to. The timing couldn't have been worse. Right when he was establishing himself outside the band, he was forced to step away. Years of progress paused. Meanwhile, Davies moved forward with Supertramp. In 1985, he released a new album under the band's name. It leaned heavily into longer, more progressive tracks. One of them stretched past 16 minutes. It was ambitious, technical, different. It even featured David Gilmour from Pink Floyd on guitar. The album did well enough. It reached the charts. It went gold. But something was missing. The wider audience wasn't connecting the same way, because the songs people kept coming back to weren't new. They were the older ones. The Logical Song, Dreamer, Take the Long Way Home. And those songs belonged to Hodgson. At least, they were supposed to. Because here's where everything starts to turn. Over time, Davies began performing those songs again during Supertramp tours. The same songs that were part of the handshake agreement. The same songs Hodgson believed were his to carry forward. And that changed everything, because now it wasn't just about music, it was about trust. Hodgson felt betrayed, not just professionally, but personally. These weren't just hits, these were songs he had written from his own experiences, his own perspective. And now they were being used without him, to sell tickets, to represent a band that no longer included him. And the fans? Most of them didn't know the difference. They saw the name, they heard the songs, and they assumed it was the same band. But behind the scenes, the tension was building again. Only this time, there was no partnership holding it together, no shared goal, just history and disagreement. And then, it got even worse. Years later, the conflict turned legal. Members of the classic lineup, people Hodgson once considered close, filed a lawsuit over royalty agreements dating back decades. Money that had been shared, now being questioned. Claims that agreements meant to be temporary should still apply. Hodgson pushed back. Hard. At one point, his legal team described the situation as a pack of wolves going after the man who actually wrote the songs. That's how far things had fallen. From a band built on contrast and collaboration, to former bandmates fighting over ownership. And in 2025, a court ruling went against Hodgson. The payments would continue, for the life of the copyrights. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was something deeper. Because by that point, the relationships were already gone. And now, whatever was left, was final. At first, the split looked clean. Hodgson launched his solo career in 1984, and it worked. His album sold around 2 million copies, and for many fans, it felt like a continuation of the sound they loved from Breakfast in America. He toured and stayed connected to his audience. Then everything stopped. In 1987, he broke both wrists in an accident. Suddenly, he couldn't perform. The momentum he had built disappeared almost overnight. Meanwhile, Davies continued with Supertramp. In 1985, he released a new album that leaned into longer, more progressive music. It performed well enough, but something was missing. Because the songs fans really wanted were older. The Logical Song, Dreamer, Take the Long Way Home. And those songs were tied to Hodgson. But over time, Davies began performing them again during Supertramp tours. And that broke the handshake. Hodgson saw it as a betrayal. Not just business, but personal. These were songs he had written, now being used without him, while fans believed they were hearing the original band. And then, it got worse. Years later, former bandmates filed a lawsuit over old royalty agreements. Hodgson fought it, but in 2025, the court ruled against him. The payments would continue, and whatever was left of those relationships was over.